Well, if it isn't Metroid. Despite being one of the greatest video game series ever, I'm surprised you're still a thing considering what's happened to you over recent years. But even with a few hiccups, I still have faith you'll make a comeback and remind people why you're one of the greatest video game series ever. I just hope Nintendo delivers with this thing. The Metroid series is famous for many different attributes and has gained universal acclaim for them, but one aspect of the Metroid series that's always stood out to me is the bosses. I mean, with a setting and premise like Metroid, there's no end to how creative and epic the bosses can be, and it shows. The bosses in Metroid are something I always look forward to in each game, as they make for some of the most intense and memorable moments in the franchise, testing you on your ability to fully utilize your arsenal and using your brain to figure out the boss's weaknesses. And with that in mind, I feel the time to talk about this series is long overdue. So join me everyone, as it's time to face some of the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy, as I count down my top 10 Metroid bosses. Just need to establish a few ground rules before I get authorization for this countdown. First of all, this is just my opinion, and I'm ranking each boss on how good I find them to be, either for the fight itself, the atmosphere and build-up, how it makes use out of Samus' abilities, and so on. Secondly is that I'm not doing final bosses, only normal ones, so there's no Mother Brain or Metroid Prime. Third is that I'm including more than one boss per game because sometimes one game can feature some of the best bosses in the series. Fourth is that there are many recurring bosses in the Metroid series, but I'm only choosing one fight from one game in order to make it fair, so we can't have multiple Ridley battles or Dark Samus fights, just one. And finally, I'm looking at the bosses in all the Metroid games with the exception of Federation Force because fuck that game, I ain't playing it, and AMR2 because I haven't played it yet. Why? Because my backlog is fucking huge right now! And with all that cleared up, it's time for us to suit up and get ready for battle, as these 10 bad boys are creatures from the darkest depths of space, and it's up to us, and us alone, to tackle them head on. So I ask this once, and once only. Any objections, lady? Berserker Lord. First bosses are often very hit or miss when it comes to video games, since sometimes they can be pathetically easy and don't offer any sort of challenge, however sometimes they can be great fun and set the standard for the rest of the game, with the Berserker Lord falling into the latter. While this boss isn't too hard, I mean it's the first boss after all, this isn't fucking Bloodborne, this boss is loads of fun to fight and helps set the standard for what to expect from Prime 3, plus it helps add to what has to be the greatest opening sequence to any video game, like seriously that first hour is phenomenal. The Berserker Lord is the first boss in Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, though it reappears later in the game and has other variants scattered throughout. Being a first boss, the Berserker Lord is a bit easy since his attacks aren't too strong and they're rather easy to avoid as well, not to mention being blatantly used to show off the game's motion controls because there wasn't enough of that in the game already. Some may see this as a rather poor boss, however for the point in the game in which it appears, I think it's just fine, since while not too strong, this thing has a wide variety of attacks to keep you on your toes and make the battle interesting. As first bosses go in Metroid, I think this thing is pretty good and certainly one of the stronger ones, and while not perfect, at the very least it's a fun and memorable fight. I also really like this thing's design, as it looks really cool and intimidating and certainly feels like a berserker space pirate. First bosses will forever be our make or break situation when it comes to video games, and well the Berserker Lord certainly makes the opening to Prime 3 all the more enjoyable, being an all around fun and badass looking boss that's perfect for the point in the game in which it appears. Talk about hitting the ground running. Kraid. It's amazing how much games can improve and change with a 16-bit overhaul. I mean it worked wonders for Mario, Zelda, Donkey Kong, Mega Man and Final Fantasy, and in the case of Metroid, Kraid went from being a small, rather meh boss to holy shit, this motherfucker's too big for Smash! His size isn't just for show though, since Kraid is one of the most memorable and iconic bosses in the entire series and the fight in Super Metroid is easily the best version of this battle to date, though I always wondered what fighting this guy in 3D would be like. Well, I guess Smash Bros is the closest we're ever going to get at this point. Kraid is the fourth boss in Super Metroid and is located within Brintstar on the way to getting the Varia suit. Going from Metroid on the NES to Super Metroid, Kraid has certainly changed for the better, since as soon as the fight starts he's already taking up most of the screen, and as the fight continues you then see his full body and just how huge he really is. Like Jesus dude, you really let yourself go between games. This fight is remembered mostly for its spectacle rather than the actual battle, since fighting Kraid is rather easy and repetitive as well, but it does force you to use more careful aiming and can be difficult if you're reckless or not keeping an eye on your surroundings, but it's the sheer scope of this battle that makes it so good, and you really feel the epicness surrounding it. The same goes for the battle in Metroid Zero Mission, but in that game Kraid is way too easy. Then again, that entire game is really easy. I find it ironic that despite being one of the main villains, Kraid hasn't appeared in the series that much, but considering the impact of his fight in Super Metroid and how it's just as impressive every time, I can see why he's such a big part of the series. Let's just hope that when Metroid does come back to us in all its glory, Kraid is there waiting for us in the depths of Brinstar. Thardus. Rock monsters. A rather common cliche in sci-fi and fantasy, but hey, they work surprisingly well and people seem to love them. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Well, Metroid Prime proves this once again, since Thardus is a very solid boss, no pun intended, and one of the best bosses in Metroid Prime, being a fun, challenging, and very atmospheric fight. Not to mention the fact that you're facing a giant rock monster. You just can't go wrong with that! Thardus is the 6th boss in Metroid Prime and is located in the Phendrana Drifts on the way to getting the Spider Ball. From the moment you start the fight, you know exactly what you're getting yourself into. I mean, come on, giant rock monster. It's not hard to imagine what this thing will do, and it pretty much delivers on that note, since Thardus has a nice variety of attacks, mostly being rock based, as well as other moves like Trails of Ice, as well as manipulating the atmosphere. In terms of challenge, this thing is very middle of the road, since while he doesn't do much damage, you have to be sure to avoid his multitude of attacks as well as make proper use out of the thermal visor in order to exploit his weaknesses. Much like Kraid, the atmosphere is what makes this battle, since Phendrana Drifts was already one of the most atmospheric parts of Metroid Prime, and having to fight this giant rock colossus just makes the situation seem so epic and large, especially with the first person perspective. Man, imagine if they made a virtual reality Metroid game. Now that would be some shit. Taking an old concept that has been done to death may seem like a bad idea, but as long as you do something interesting with it, it can work out in your favour. I mean, Pokemon does it all the damn time, and I feel the fight with Thardus is a prime, get it, example of this, being not a very original boss, but rather being a very fun and memorable boss, and that's what really matters at the end of the day. The Nightmare. Sometimes the best type of boss fights are the ones that are built up throughout the course of the game, keeping you guessing as to what you're fighting and making the encounter all the more epic and memorable, and the Nightmare from Metroid Fusion is a brilliant example of this. While the boss as a whole isn't too hard and the fight in Other M is certainly more involved, the atmosphere in this fight and the way it's been foreshadowed make this a truly standout fight and one battle that will never leave your memories and your nightmares because, oh Jesus Christ, get away from me, get away from me! The Nightmare is the 8th boss in Metroid Fusion and is located in Sector 5 after it's done completely trashing the place and before obtaining the gravity suit. I feel the best way to describe this thing and the battle as a whole is style over substance, since the main draw of this fight is how throughout Metroid Fusion there were small glimpses of the Nightmare shadow moving about Sector 5, letting you know that it was out there, but not knowing exactly what was out there. And when you get round to actually fighting it, the build-up has been done so well that you really feel the tension Samus was going through. Good thing she didn't become paralysed with fear like that other time. The fight itself, however, isn't much of a high point, since while this thing can do a lot of damage and the way it manipulates gravity is neat, the fight is rather simple and just mostly consists of you unloading missiles into this thing's face. I mean, to Other M's credit, the fight in that game was just overall more engaging and interesting, but I can't deny that the fight in Fusion is better mainly due to the situation at hand, and even if the boss is easy, it's still loads of fun just to go to town on this thing's face, though personally I wouldn't touch it with the long end of a stick. It's funny that sometimes the build up to something is better than the payoff. I mean, it's how I feel with Zant in Twilight Princess, and this also holds true for the Nightmare, as the fight against this thing is one of the most tense and ambient battles in the series, even if it is a little on the simple side. The Omega Space Pirate. It's no surprise that sometimes bosses will take the form of regular enemies but with some new attacks and made much stronger. I mean, it's the easy way out and it's much less of a hassle to program, as well as often being downright lazy sometimes. But hey, it can lead to some really awesome fights, and it's safe to say that the Omega Space Pirate does just that. This boss, while being just a strong version of the Elite Pirate, has a few new tricks up its sleeve and is a much tougher monster to fight, as well as being a rather intense and downright badass battle. Guess this guy has the rank of Omega Pirate for a reason. The Omega Space Pirate is the 9th boss in Metroid Prime and is located at the end of the Phazon Mines and before getting the Phazon suit, which is acquired after this thing unloads all over Samus. Charming. Like I mentioned previously, the Omega Space Pirate is very much a stronger version of the Elite Pirate, so most of its attacks are pretty much the same with a few new ones spliced in between, as well as being just more powerful and taking more hits. While not that new, the fight is still loads of fun and rather challenging, since this thing is often on the defensive and you have a small window of time to attack it, so you have to make sure that your shots count, along with keeping an eye out for the large pools of Phazon scattered around the map. Much like the Berserker Lord, the Omega Space Pirate looks awesome, and fighting this thing just makes you feel like an even bigger badass, and this is definitely one of the most fun battles in Metroid Prime, even if it does feel somewhat familiar. While I can imagine some people would cry foul as this boss can be seen as just an upscaled enemy, I for one love this fight and find it to be the best part of the Phazon Mines, being similar, yes, but for all the right reasons, as well as just loads of fun to fight, though the death of this thing still looks a little risque. I'm honestly surprised Nintendo were okay with this sort of thing. Gauranga. Metroid Other M has got to be one of the most overhated games ever. I mean, there are parts of this game that are truly dreadful and worth the bashing it gets. But there's also a lot of good to this game, and I feel people often forget that because they're focusing too much on the negatives. It's like Skyward Sword and Fire Emblem Fates all over again. One area I feel Other M did very well in was the boss battles, and by god was Gauranga one of the most awesome bosses in a Metroid game, being one of the most action-packed, cinematic, challenging and downright kick-ass bosses in Other M, and Metroid as a whole. Just goes to show that you shouldn't focus on the bad stuff all the time. Maybe then we can evolve past ignorant hate comments and pointless flame wars. What am I saying? This is the internet, that's never gonna happen. Gauranga is the 5th boss in Metroid Other M, and is located in Sector 3 after Samus goes through the entire thing without activating her Mario suit until this very fight. It's shit like this that makes you deserve all the bashings you get, Other M. Because Other M is more of a third-person action game in the style of Ninja Gaiden, Gauranga is designed to take advantage of this. In fact, pretty much all the bosses in Other M are, since this baby not only hits hard, but also has a lot of attacks that come out fast and even lead into one another, so this fight is rather challenging, but it's also a very action-packed fight that keeps you on your toes and the experience is just a ton of fun. During the fight, you'll be switching between first and third person in order to take him down, not to mention the setting and atmosphere in this battle are just so epic, and the moments where you travel across this thing's body in order to land a lethal blow are truly cinematic, and makes this one of the most standout battles in Other M. Metroid Other M, while certainly a flawed game, and some flaws I will not defend, still has many aspects that are good if not great, and this boss fight is one of the best examples I can think of, because there's nothing like climbing up to the top of a giant alien monster's head and just blasting it right square in the face. Now that is what I call satisfaction. Dark Samus Phase 2. Well, of course Dark Samus was going to be on here. She's one of the biggest parts of Metroid, and pretty much the entire focus of the Prime series, so it seems fitting that she would have some of the best boss fights in it too. Now, you fight Dark Samus 4 times in the Prime series, but since 2 of them are final boss fights, I'm going to go with her second phase from Echoes, as this fight was much more action-packed and thrilling than the first one, as well as being a much more strategic fight, and a more challenging one. Man, Dark Samus, you really deliver when you need to, though I expect nothing less from my 9th favourite Nintendo villain. Dark Samus' second phase is the 12th boss fight in Metroid Prime 2, and is located in Sanctuary Fortress before getting the Echo Visor. Being a second phase battle, the core essence of fighting Dark Samus stays very much the same, though there are new bells and whistles to make the fight more interesting and challenging, such as new attacks, switching between different fields of vision, along with new ways of fighting and smarter AI. So while very much the same as the first fight, Dark Samus has certainly stepped up her game and actually feels like a threat this time. Out of all the Dark Samus battles, I find this one in particular to be the best, as the first one was too easy and a bit too simple, the third battle was too repetitive, and the final battle, while cool and probably the most varied fight out of all 4, was again too easy because of Hyper Mode, whereas this fight is just right in terms of difficulty and was the most fun I had fighting Dark Samus. While a rather predictable entry, I just couldn't say no to this fight, since it really is the best battle with Dark Samus and one of the best fights in Echoes as a whole. It seems Nintendo knows exactly what they're doing when it comes to Dark Doppelgangers. Quadraxis. Remember when I said Metroid bosses were about testing your abilities to fully utilize your arsenal and using your brain to figure out the boss's weakness? Well, I don't think any other boss embodies this better than Quadraxis. I mean, holy shit, this boss is so much fun to fight, and the amount of variety in this fight is just downright amazing, as you really have to make use of everything you have in order to work your way through each phase of the fight, with each one becoming trickier and trickier, so be sure to be stocked up beforehand, because you're in for the long haul with this one. Quadraxis is the 13th boss in Metroid Prime 2, man, it's just one great boss fight after another in this game, and is located in the dark world of the Sanctuary Fortress before getting the Annihilator Beam. In most Metroid games, bosses will often incorporate the use of 1 or 2 of Samus' abilities into the battle, and you often exploit that in order to win. Don't worry, Zelda does it too, sometimes much worse in fact. While in the case of Quadraxis, this boss makes use out of literally everything. Beam weapons, missiles, bombs, different visors, you name it, making this boss so much fun to fight and constantly changing things up to make the battle interesting and unique. This boss isn't too hard in all honesty, but you shouldn't take it lightly either since it may catch you off guard from time to time, and because this thing has multiple forms, you can't just rely on one technique to win, but rather the fight is about how the player adapts to the situation, and that is a sign of a great boss in my books. I always love it when bosses change things up and keep introducing new elements into the battle, and I feel no other boss does this better than Quadraxis, being easily the best boss in Prime 2 Echoes and one of the most original bosses in the Metroid series. It's like variety is the spice of life. Yes. Rundas. Metroid Prime 3 is where I felt the series started becoming much more cinematic and story driven, since aside from those gorgeous cutscenes, this is the first Metroid game to be fully voice acted, which ironically got worse in future games. Plus, there were a lot more character interactions, in particular with the 3 bounty hunters, with number 2 on this list being none other than the Iceman himself, Rundas, the literal coolest bro ever, and I am not sorry for that. While this dude might be a total bro, he's no slouch in a fight, since Rundas is one of the best early game bosses and one of the best bosses in Prime 3 as a whole, and considering all the outstanding moments in that game, I do not say that lightly. Rundas is the 3rd boss in Metroid Prime 3 and is located in Brio before getting the ice missiles. Since we've already seen Rundas in action beforehand, being the badass that he is, you already have an idea of what to expect from this battle, and my god does Rundas deliver. Obviously this guy is ice-based and has the standard ice-based attacks like freezing blasts, ice clubs and ice pillars and so on, but on top of that he can zip around on his ice surfboard thingy, as well as have many other attacks to boot, making Rundas a very versatile fighter and a rather tough boss for this early on in the game. This already makes Rundas an awesome boss, but to me, I just find Rundas to be such a fun boss battle. The fight is just so engaging as both your reflexes and skills are being tested greatly in this fight, along with that kick-ass score to accompany it. The fight with Rundas is also a rather epic one since we've already known this guy and he's pretty much everyone's favourite of the 3 hunters, so having to fight against him is both tragic and awesome at the same time. But more tragic since once you beat him, Dark Samus intervenes and oh shit, that's gonna hurt. The bounty hunters from Corruption certainly add much to the game as both characters and bosses, but I think at this point it's unanimous that Rundas is the greatest of the 3, being one of the most fun bosses I've ever faced and having one of the grandest battles to ever be fought in a Metroid game, and one character who will live on forever in our hearts. Farewell, sweet prince. We shall never forget thee. Before we get to number 1, I just want to do a few honourable mentions. First up is Crocomire. Crocomire is a cool boss and the fight is very iconic. However, this boss isn't very hard and can get rather stale after a while. Next up is Vorash. Vorash was a really unique boss and the fight was loads of fun too, as well as being very cinematic. It just wasn't good enough to make it on the list. After that we have Chaika. Chaika was certainly a very interesting battle and a very memorable one too. However, this battle drags after a while and can get rather tedious. Following on we have Moganar. Moganar was a very epic boss and is a lot of fun to fight the first time around. However, once you discover the best way to win, this guy starts falling like a stack of dominoes. And finally there's the BOX security robot. This was a very intense battle and I like that it was a reoccurring boss throughout the game, but like with Moganar, once you know the pattern for this thing, it really isn't much to fight. Anyway, with all that out of the way, on to the number 1 entry. Ridley. Well, no duh Ridley was going to be number 1. I mean, he's the main villain of the series and his boss fights are pretty much the best in every Metroid game. Well, almost. Now there have been a ton of Ridley fights in the series, and while each of them are great, I can only decide on one, and for me it boiled down to 3 fights. The fight in Other M, the fight in Prime 3 and the fight in Super Metroid. And in this case, I'm gonna go with Super Metroid. Talk about incredible. I don't think I've ever faced a boss that was so intense and wonderfully built up as the Ridley battle in Super Metroid, as this battle delivers on everything, and to this day, I still get goosebumps every time I enter that room and hear that roar. It's no wonder this guy was my favourite Nintendo villain. Still sucks that he's not playable in Smash though. Ridley is the second to last boss of Super Metroid and is located in Lower Norfair, only you just get an energy tank for beating him. Figures. This fight literally has everything, from the build-up, to the atmosphere, to the intense and downright earth-shattering confrontation between the two. Nothing in any other Metroid game compares to it. Despite not having as many moves or being as complex as other bosses, the fight with Ridley is both epic and really challenging, since the room size is rather small and the lava slowly rises, so there's not much space for you to move about, which allows Ridley to charge into you and use his tail to attack you. And this guy not only hits hard, but also has a ton of HP. I mean, when I fight Ridley, I make sure to have as many items as possible at that point in the game, and he still eats missiles like Metroid eat your face. Out of all the Ridley fights in this series, none of them have reached the level of sheer brilliance that the battle in Super Metroid has, and some of the fights like in Other M and Prime 3 were downright fantastic, yet despite being one of the simpler, more straightforward bosses, Ridley still manages to deliver the ultimate boss battle in the ultimate Metroid game. And there you have it. The Ridley battle in Super Metroid is the best boss fight in the series. Sure, other bosses are more challenging, some more large in scope and scale, some more engaging and complex, but none of them can compare to the utter majesty of the fight with Ridley, being built up perfectly and delivering in every way possible, which is why it takes the number 1 spot as my favourite boss battle in the Metroid series. This has been Blazing Knight. I wish you all a great night, take care, and while the Metroid series has stumbled recently and most fans aren't exactly happy about it, I will still love this series no matter what happens, and the boss fights are one of the many reasons as to why. Well, it seems 2016 is drawing to a close, and well, pretty much everyone is jumping on the whole best of 2016 craze that happens this time of year. And you know what? I feel it's my turn to throw my hat into the ring as well. And while I didn't see too many movies or play a lot of video games, the one thing I did do was watch a lot of anime. Hey everyone, thank you for watching today's video. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and a comment, and why not subscribe to my channel in order to keep up to date with when the new videos are coming out. For alternate video recommendations, I first point you to my last video, Top 10 Legend of Zelda Dungeons, where I count down my top 10 favourite dungeons from the Legend of Zelda series. Next up I point you to Top 9 Team Fortress 2 classes, where I look at my 9 favourite classes from Team Fortress 2, and for something completely different, why not check out Free For All Episode 3, where I pit the 3 GBA Fire Emblem games against each other in order to see which is the best. Hopefully one of those videos will be to your liking. Once again, thank you all very much for watching, and I want to say a big thank you to all of you who follow me on Amino. You guys and gals are just wonderful people, and I love to have all the chats with you and see all the stuff you post. It really is amazing to see what you people are capable of. Anyway, that's it from me. I'll see you all next time.